We would like to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. The City of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Marcia Nelson. I'm a Senior Strategic Advisor at PricewaterhouseCoopers and an Executive Fellow here at the School of Public Policy, and I'll be hosting today's webinar. Thanks to all of you for joining us. The School of Public Policy is Canada's leading policy school, known for our practical applied research. The school is currently undertaking research to explore the potential for an ambitious national project, the Canadian Northern Corridor would be a network of multimodal rights-of-way access across middle and northern Canada with an accompanying policy, regulatory, and governance structure. The corridor would provide a space for the Sorry about that. For those of you that might have to leave early, recordings of the webinars are posted on the School of Public Policy website, and you'll receive a link in the follow-up email after the webinar. Our conversations really work the best when you supply us with your questions. So I'd ask all of you to type your questions in the Q&A box below, and I will pose them to our speaker during the course of our Q&A portion of the discussion. So let's get to it. For today's presentation, we have Dr. Frédéric Lasserre, who's going to present to us on the Canadian Arctic Marine Transportation paper that he's written. Frédéric heads the Quebec Council of Geopolitical Studies, and he's a professor at Laval University. He's carried out research on a wide range of topics, many of which are very relevant to our interests today. And at this point, I turn it over to Frédéric to take it away.
Thank you very much, Marcia, for this presentation. I'm glad to be with you this morning in Calgary. I would like also to thank the organizers for inviting me to make this presentation. In a nutshell, I'll be sharing my presentation. Oops, sorry. Here we go. So I guess it's working. So I would like to share a few thoughts with you about Canadian marine transportation issues in the context of climate change. To what extent is climate change going to change the nature and the scope of Arctic shipping in the Canadian Arctic archipelago? Would it be possible that shipping is going to expand quite fast in the future? To what extent would this shipping be helped by the construction of northern corridors across the landmass of Canada? And to what extent would that be beneficial also for precisely the economic viability of these projected northern corridors? So let's go back to the basics. We are in the context of climate change, as I said. These climate changes have been documented, debated for more than 20 years now. We know that for sure that the Arctic sea ice is receding. In the first graph we have here, we have depicted the minimum sea ice extent in September. This is the period of time when the ice is minimal, and we can definitely see that the extent of sea ice in the Arctic is receding faster and faster, as attested by these regression trends. We also here have a graph that depicts the fact that the ice is thinner and younger. So we have here the concentration of various types of ice according to their age. We know that the younger the ice, the thinner it is. Conversely, the older the ice is, the harder and the thicker it is. We can see definitely very clearly that the concentration of older ice is decreasing very fast, and there is more and more younger, thinner ice present in the Arctic. So all these together clearly underline the fact that is going to be increasingly technically feasible to navigate in the Arctic. However, you can see through this graph that there is an important interannual variability in the extent of sea ice. So from one year to another, it's very difficult to forecast the extent of sea ice despite the major trend towards the reduction of sea ice extent. There's also large variability from year to year regarding the geographic scope of sea ice. Here are a few maps of the extent of sea ice at the minimums of September in 2010, 2016, 18, 20. And these maps underline clearly the fact that along the Northern Sea route, north of Russia, the viability of Arctic sea lanes are increasing very fast. The region is clear of ice for most of the summer. However, across the Canadian archipelago, it's less clear that the trend towards the reduction of sea ice frees up Arctic sea lanes. It was free in 2010, but when you look at more recent periods of time, in 2018 to 2020, for instance, there was much more ice. This depends on the direction of the winds, the direction of the currents, the pace of the melting of the ice. So it's very difficult for shipping companies to forecast accurately to what extent it's going to be easy to navigate across the Canadian archipelago or not. So this is an important factor to take into account when assessing to what extent it's economically feasible to navigate the Arctic, despite the fact that technically, I underlined it, it's easier to navigate our Arctic waters. Marine traffic in the Canadian Arctic is characterized by very little transit traffic, despite the fact that it's been underlined that these Arctic sea lanes provide for much shorter routes between the Atlantic and the Pacific. We had to conclude, however, that this is not going necessarily to entail significant traffic, whether we talk about the Northwest Passage or the Northern Sea route for that matter. There's a little bit more traffic along the Northern Sea route, but across the Northwest Passage, most of transit traffic, which remains very limited, is composed of pleasure boats, as attested by these figures. As far as commercial cargo ships are concerned, as you can see, the traffic is still extremely limited, between 0 and in 2025 units transited the Northwest Passage, and that is without stopping over in Canadian haven or port in the Arctic. So much for the advent of super Arctic seaways for transit matters. Transit doesn't seem to interest, for the time being at least, doesn't seem to interest very much shipping companies across the Northwest Passage. That doesn't mean that shipping companies are not interested in destinational traffic. As attested by these figures, there is an increasing traffic in the Canadian archipelago. This is characterized by destinational traffic, that is, ships going to the Canadian Arctic, performing whatever economic activity they intend to do over there, and then going back to markets or to their initial port. You can see between 2009 and 2020, traffic going from 225 voyages to 444. So traffic expanded quite significantly in the Canadian Arctic in this period. What is traffic composed of? Fishing boats, as you can see, a significant share of cargo or barges. So commercial cargo ships did expand the traffic in the Canadian archipelago. Cruise passenger ships, not that much. So most of the expansion of traffic in the Canadian archipelago is composed of cargo or fishing boats, that is economic activities fueled by community resupply, for one thing, and also fueled by economic exploration or natural resources extraction. However, traffic is still very much concentrated. It's not evenly spread across the Canadian archipelago. As we can see on this map, which depicts the density of marine traffic in 2019, Arctic is still very much concentrated, fueled by the Mary River mining exploitation, a few mines in northern Quebec. I'll show them in a few minutes on a more precise map, but there are still regions where there is still very limited or no traffic at all. So very huge discrepancies in traffic density in the Canadian archipelago, despite the trends toward an increasing traffic in the Canadian Arctic. So, traffic is fueled by mainly an expanding mining activity, as I said. Not so much by oil and gas because of the moratorium that was decreed in 2016 that should be renewed by the federal government. So it's not oil and gas that is fueling traffic, contrary to what's taking place in the Russian Arctic. So it's very much expanding mining activity beyond the exploration phase that is presently fueling traffic in the Canadian Arctic. As far as mining is concerned, it represents 77% of the shipping tonnage in the Canadian Arctic. So it's a very huge proportion of traffic that is determined by natural resources extraction in the Canadian Arctic. This activity largely relying on marine supply. We have a few active mines in the Canadian archipelago presently. I mentioned the Mary River iron mine on Baffin Inland in Nunavut. There are a few nickel and lead mines in northern Quebec. There are a few other mines active presently, gold mines that do not ship much ore, of course, but that rely on marine traffic for their supply. And there are a few projects that should come online in a few years. So there is a nice future prospected for the mining activity in the Canadian Arctic in the next few years, supported by rising world prices for natural resources. The issue for this activity, largely relying on marine traffic for its logistics, is the quality of port infrastructure. There is no port, or barely any port in the Canadian Arctic, so mining companies have to build their own ports in the Arctic, whether in Deception Bay in northern Quebec, whether in Mine Inlet for the Mary River iron mine. Mining companies have to make do with the fact that there is no port built in the Canadian Arctic, so they must either build their own deep sea port or make do with havens, which I'll show you in a few minutes. Then it raises the question, to what extent would it be easier for these mining ventures to rely on land transportation, especially all the set of diamond gold mines that you can see on this map and on the Canadian continental Arctic region. There is a winter road from Yellowknife to this region that is, of course, working only when the ice is solid. And there are projects to build a hard all year round road between Yellowknife and this region. Of course, the cost is very high, so there are discussions to what extent it's going to be feasible to build these roads. The logistics for mining operations, as I said, is complicated by the fact that shipping companies have to make do with only haven and no real ports. So here we have a picture of the haven servicing the Sabina Gold project in the continental Canadian Arctic. We see it's only a stopover for barges pushed by tugs. So it's not quite a port, it's just a stop haven that provides for the offloading of material on the barges. Here we have a view of how it's operated in Iqaluit. So the ships have to moor offshore, then they offload the cargo on barges that then go onto the beach where it is offloaded by trucks and cranes. So it's not very easy for shipping companies, but they manage the expertise. They managed to develop the expertise to perform quite effective service despite this logistical constraint. So would that mean that there is a potential for corridors in this context? Shipping companies that are present in the Arctic, let's name but a few. There's NIAS, Degagné, Woodward, NTS, the former NTCL, developed a solid expertise, as I said, to cope with this rough logistical conditions that is present in the Canadian Arctic. Very different from what is prevalent in Greenland, for instance, where most villages do enjoy the presence of ports. Very different also from what is prevalent in the Russian Arctic. So very few ports in the Canadian Arctic, only havens. They may also, although they will not claim it, consider this as a useful barrier to entry into their markets, since they over time developed a solid expertise to cope with the presence of havens and no real port. They also rely on the fact that it's very difficult for another shipping company to enter the market, because it would take time for this company to develop the expertise to manage loading, offloading goods in the presence of havens. With the melting ice in the context of climate change, we may wonder to what extent companies considered increasing the frequency, considering increasing the rotation of ships to take advantage of the fact that there is less ice in the summertime. In fact, one realizes that the companies chose not to increase that much the frequency of voyages, but rather increase the ship capacity. So they bought larger, heavier ships that could carry more goods. And they also expanded the geographic scope of their network, except MTS. So this is the picture of network, the communities and sites serviced by NIAS in 2020. 20 years before, it would have been limited to Hudson Bay and Northern Quebec. So we see that we can see that the company expanded the geographic scope of its activity and serviced an increasing number of communities as well, thanks to the fact that there is less ice. And also serviced Churchill. I'll come back to that in a minute. It's not because there is a need in Churchill, but because the fact that it's connected through the railway to the North American network, which the company used as a transshipment hub for resupply. So to what extent then, in this context, would it be possible for shipping companies to take advantage of railway or road connections, transport corridors across the landmass, the Canadian landmass? As I hinted, that was tried by NIAS in 2020. It's also been tried before by Degagné in 2008, NTCL between 2009 and 2022 through the connection at Hay River in the Great Slave Lake. So more and more shipping companies tend to consider it's possible to increase the efficiency of ships present in the Arctic through the fact that they could resupply in transshipment hubs. Churchill, for instance, Moosonee, Iqaluit for that matter. To what extent would it be possible, since the port is supposed to be finished this year or next year, and to use these platforms to offload large quantities of commercial goods and then spread the merchandise, the cargo, along communities or mining sites. It would also be possible to use Bathurst Inlet of Grays Bay, for instance, the terminals of the projected road that I mentioned to you a few minutes ago, to offload or unload cargo that would be shipped from continental Canada to increase service to other communities. So there is a possibility then to see the synergy between port development and land corridors, since there are rail connections to Moosonee, Churchill, or Hay River that are already functioning. Since Tuktoyaktuk became connected by road in 2017 to the Canadian network, it's possible on paper to transform them into logistical hubs. So goods could be shipped to these locations where the goods could be loaded onto ships that would be then sent to their final destinations, whether communities or mining sites. The project to Grays Bay with a permanent road from Yellowknife could also work that way. There are problems, limitations though, because as I hinted, building a road, permanent road in this context implies heavy costs. It also implies, for instance, if you want to use the rail connection to Hay River, several reloads, because the rail is going to Hay River, then we have to unload goods onto a boat to ship to Yellowknife, then it have to be transshipped to the road. But there are companies that still consider it might be profitable to take advantage of these transportation links. They explore the possibility to develop these land corridors. It could both benefit from and fuel marine supply for communities and mining operations. So the fact that the shipping companies have the expertise and intend to expand their activities in the Canadian Arctic could present an opportunity to make more profitable the land corridors projects. And conversely, the presence of these land corridors could also benefit the shipping companies by increasing the amount of the good that they could spread across the Canadian Arctic. Another question, to what extent these corridors would, if developed, be real corridors, that is pulling development along their way, or would they be merely links that cross huge expanses of land without having any beneficial use for the territories that they cross? This, of course, nobody can answer yet. It depends on the way the economic benefits of these corridors would be developed for the territories that are involved. That's all I wanted to share to begin with. I'll be taking questions, of course, with great pleasure.
Thanks so much for that great presentation, Frederick, and for the paper. I have to say, when I read the paper, I found I learned so much, and it really contributed to, I think, that the whole theme with this series, which is separating the rhetoric from the reality, right? So I'll go to questions from the audience, but let's start off with a question from me. And it goes to that point about rhetoric versus reality, because traditionally, what we've heard commentators talk about or focus on is that with Arctic warming, there's the opportunity to open up new navigable waters, and with that unlock, additional economic opportunity. And yet your analysis talks about the fact that, with climate change, what we're seeing is a thinning of the ice, increasing calving from icebergs, new pressure ridges in strange places. And, all in all, it just presents significant new types of challenges in navigating those waters. So I guess my first question to you is, as a group that's probably interested in unlocking additional economic opportunity, how do we analyze or navigate this kind of chaotic new environment that's being presented? How should we think about and look at the impact of climate change on these waters?
This is a very relevant and interesting question. I didn't go into the details in my first presentation, but you're quite right. What appears to be the impacts of climate change is not that simple. The media, in the debates, we often highlight the fact that sea ice is melting, which is only part of the picture. It's true that sea ice is melting. It's true that there are vast expanses of sea that is ice-free in the summertime, not necessarily all in the Arctic waters, by the way, especially in the Canadian archipelago, as I underlined. But climate change and the melting of sea ice also translates into, especially in spring and fall, into the building up of pressure ridges when the ice reforms, into more icebergs calving from Greenland. So that impacts the security of shipping in the Canadian archipelago, at least around the Canadian coast, because we're close to Greenland, much less so along the Russian coast. So the broad picture could be that it's more feasible to enter into Arctic shipping because there is less ice, because ice is thinner, that's true. But it also makes it more complicated depending on the period of the time. And most shipping companies know that when they're in business in Arctic shipping, they have to adapt to this situation. I've talked several times with the executives from FedNav, Degagné, NIES, and they all told me the same story. Yes, there are periods of time when it's much easier to navigate, but there was also a period of time when it's much more difficult than it used to be. So it's not that simple.
Indeed. So most of the research in this program, right, on the Canadian National Corridor has really focused on land-based corridors and their impacts for economic activity and ability to ship goods and do this in a streamlined way. And of course, your paper presents the opportunity of considering and thinking about links to an equally efficient marine corridor. So what would you see as some of the benefits of that kind of an approach, right? Linking a land-based corridor to a marine corridor. And I guess, is there any thought about, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Do you develop the land-based corridor, then the port, then the marine corridor, or does that just not matter?
What I hinted was that it's quite possible to benefit from both the development of marine traffic and from the development of our land-based corridors. With land-based corridors to havens or ports in the Canadian Arctic, it would be possible for shipping companies that are already present in this market to have ships stay longer in the Arctic. Now, most ships from NIES, Degagné, Woodward, they go to the Arctic, they offload the cargo, and then they have to go back to either Montreal or St. John's from NIES, Degagné, and so they waste time, basically. So if they have the opportunity to stay much longer in the Arctic, where they perform their economic activity, then it's very beneficial for them. That would be possible if they can use transshipment hubs like Churchill to reload the ships when they're over there in the Arctic. So that would be possible with the construction of land-based transportation corridors. So that could help to reach beneficial economic profitability for these corridors. Reciprocally, those ships could also provide for another market. The corridors could also benefit mining operations, and not necessarily mining operations that are close to the corridors, but because of an increased service provided by shipping companies, then they could also use the presence of these corridors to service mining sites that are not necessarily close to the corridors. Because the first question when we raised the issue of the profitability of corridors is they're going to service regions in the vicinity of the line, but then to what extent would it be beneficial for mining sites from, say, 200, 300 kilometers away? So if there is a synergy that's going to be developed between marine service and land transportation with these corridors, I think it's possible to consider profitability for these endeavors. Of course, then it raises the question, who's going to pay for it and what kind of infrastructure is going to be built? Because as I also underlined, it's very expensive to build heavy infrastructure that far in the Canadian Arctic.
You bet. That really goes to my next question, is really around the lack of port infrastructure, because your paper really demonstrates that the lack of that infrastructure is, it's a key feature in your analysis, and it really shows that the lack of deep water ports hampers both marine and land-based economic activity in the region. So I guess my question to you is, can you talk at all about any efforts you're aware of on kind of where port infrastructure development is in the Arctic, and any models or initiatives you're aware of?
There's a wharf going to be inaugurated in Iqaluit, whether maybe this year or otherwise next year. It took more than 30 years of debates before it was built. So I found a few papers dating from the end of the previous century, considering advocating for the construction of this wharf. It takes a long time precisely because the market is small, the costs are significant, and so public authorities wonder to what extent they're going to be paid off, given the very small market that they're going to service. So there are very significant limitations to the idea that we should build more significant infrastructure. So there's going to be this port in Iqaluit. There was a port in Nanisivik servicing a mine over there that now is serving as a Navy refueling facility. It's only a very limited port. Some also rather think it should be classified as a haven. Otherwise, the other port in the Arctic is the port of Churchill that was built in the 1930s, thanks to the federal government at the time, to ship grain from the prairies. But it's remote from most of the central Arctic archipelago and Canadian Arctic. Otherwise, the other ports that are in operations in the Arctic are private ports built by Mary River mining operations, or built by mining operations in Deception Bay, northern Quebec. The huge cost involved in the construction of real ports in the Arctic is a real limitation to the construction of the infrastructure. However, they also severely limit the possibility of a service expansion in the Canadian archipelago.
Well, can we talk a little bit more about Churchill? Because, Churchill, it's serviced by a railroad, although, challenges with the railroad access to it. And Churchill is one of the only communities in the north with a deep water port of that nature. And yet it seems such little traffic. And it was closed for years. It's only recently reopened. So can you, given the strategic importance of a deep water port and really the lack of any other facilities, can you talk about what limits the viability of Churchill, or just explain to me why is it not as utilized as it could be?
Well, the story of Churchill exemplifies the idea that it's not build it and they will come. Yeah. It's not because you have a deep sea port. It's not because you have a connection, railway connection to the North American network, for that matter, that you have traffic. On paper, everything seems nice for Churchill, and so long as there was traffic, grain traffic from the prairies, the port was very busy. But when traffic evaporated, grain traffic, there were plans to develop shipping, what was called the Arctic Bridge, a connection between Churchill and Murmansk in Russia, which was supposed to have a bright future, thanks to precisely climate change and the melting of sea ice. That never materialized. In fact, there were so few ships coming every year that the port percolated and then eventually was closed for a few years. Now it's been put into activity once again because it's been purchased back by a company with native interests in it, which I think is quite interesting for the local development. But they still have to find a business model for it to expand and remain profitable. So they have to convince shipping companies that they can make money servicing this port, whether for import or for export.
Okay. So let me go to a question as well from the audience, because I think this is a critical one. Are you seeing evidence of proponents of developments beginning to work more with First Nations and local communities, and ensuring that they get their involvement up front? Because it is that lack of involvement and engagement that has proven to be very significant barriers for other types of projects. Are you seeing that in your research?
I'm not familiar with what the promoters of the Port of Churchill have in mind, but I do know that, for instance, in Iqaluit, the Nunavut government is really keen on the development of the local port, because several local manufacturing activities, would-be activities, could never develop because of the lack of transportation facility. Of course, Degani has serviced the place with so few possibility of shipments every year, it was very difficult for local economic activity to really take off, or they have to take the plane, which is much more expensive. So it makes for too high prices for the goods to be sold southwards. So with the possibility that there will be a port, a more effective wharf in Iqaluit, then the possibility of small but still effective manufacturing in Iqaluit is taking off. There is a brewery, for instance, working in Iqaluit, which seems to be odd, but it's working, and even selling beer in Quebec and in Ontario. So it's, as you said, the hen or the egg, what is going to be first, but it's very obvious that if there is no efficient transportation between northern communities and southern markets, it's very difficult for economic manufacturing or activities to take off, because they cannot, the market over there is too small. So if they want to expand, they need to have the possibility to sell the products in southern Canada. That means whether land-based corridor or a more efficient marine service.
So I can't resist, given that you're the head of a geopolitical institute, you've got, a background in geopolitics. I just really want to pick up the geopolitical aspect of Arctic transit and all the interest, because we know that Russia is heavily promoting transit opportunities in the north, and you identified the increase in traffic in the NSR. Of course, China and the US, they've both demonstrated, I guess, what we could call Arctic ambitions of various kinds. And yet, in Canada, with the moratorium on oil and gas in the north, the pretty limited mining developments that are underway at present, although there is lots of future opportunity. What are the implications here for Canada when you have other Arctic actors being pretty aggressive, and Canada's policy seems pretty passive?
What is certain is that the Northwest Passage is less and less on the map as far as transit is concerned. First, because, as I hinted, it's much easier to navigate Russian waters than Canadian waters. There is much less ice along the NSR, but also because Russia is actively promoting the possibility of shipping along the Northern Sea route, whereas Canada is not promoting. It's not preventing, but it's doing nothing to promote navigability as far as transit is concerned across the Canadian archipelago. This is probably a political choice, because promoting it would mean manage the risks implied with, of course, shipping. It would also mean investing in infrastructure and services, because, of course, Russia is quite aware of the fact that if they want to attract shipping companies, then they must provide a service. They need to have the companies pay for it, of course, but they need beforehand to invest in search and rescue facilities, in buoys, in ports, and to welcome ships if they need to stop over to repair for repairs. They need to invest in icebreakers, all things that we do not have, not that much in Canada. So promoting navigation across the Northwest Passage would imply investments that the federal government obviously is reluctant to do.
I mean, one question from an audience member is related to some of that capacity on the side of the federal government, and the question is the current satellite coverage of the ice thickness and iceberg travel and really the environment there, is it sufficient at this point for additional Arctic navigation, or does the federal government need to beef up that capacity in order to make this navigation a bit more viable?
Present services provided by Rhetoric, so the northern arm of the Canadian Coast Guard, is deemed quite efficient by most shipping companies I talked to. Of course, the monitoring of sea ice could certainly be improved, but it's not so much that problem. Shipping companies hint much more the fact that the ice charts are not accurate enough, much more than the fact that the Canadian government should invest in ice monitoring. because it's true that the maybe 15 to 20% of the Arctic archipelago is accurately charted. So if you get out of the main shipping corridors, the main shipping lines, then you're in real danger because the maps are not accurate enough. So if, for instance, the street you want to go into is ice clogged, then you want to use an alternate shipping lane, then you're running into trouble possibly because the itinerary you want to use is not properly charted. So it also limits the possibility of shipping in the Canadian archipelago because of the high risks, of the severe limitations made for by the fact the ice charts are not very accurate.
Maybe just to go in another direction, your paper really demonstrated that the shipping in the Arctic is based on fishing, mining, and community resupply, right? That's in terms of the destination type shipping that goes on. And one audience member is asking about whether the change in the need for fuel transport in the Canadian Arctic, moving away from diesel and pursuing other types of fuel sources, do you think that will have an impact on the economic viability of some of the shipping for community resupply?
Most of the communities now heavily rely on precisely diesel supply because there's not much alternative to produce electricity in these remote communities. I know that there are a few northern Quebec communities that would like to tap into windmill production, for instance, or building a few small dams to complement the hydropower. But we're far from seeing all northern communities not depending on diesel supply. That may be the case maybe in 30, 40 years, but I doubt it. Okay. So there will still be a significant market for the supply of diesel as well for these communities, especially if industry is expanding, which we hope is going to be the case in these communities. There will be an increased demand for power. So the question is how is it going to come? Where is it going to come from? Because we may build windmills, we may build a few small hydropower dams, but is it going to be enough to provide power for the community and for the increased demand stemming from the nascent industry?
Well, I'm going to ask you to forecast a little bit further as well on the commodity side of things, because of course it is the prices in the commodity markets that are going to be driving demand and of course the desire to supply some of the natural resources out of the Arctic. And of course that drives the shipping activity. So what's your view of that? What's your outlook on commodities and the drive for additional economic activity in the north?
It's very difficult to make long-term forecast for commodities and commodity prices. The fact that the commodity prices went down sharply a few years ago surprised several observers. So what mining companies learned from these episodes is that there's a high volatility in commodities prices presently. So now we see that prices are picking up somewhat because transition in the Chinese economy has been going on for several years. So the demand the supply has adapted to the changed demand on the Chinese market. There are other emerging economies like India or Brazil that could replace the Chinese demand in the commodities market. I guess the prices will keep gradually expanding in the next few years. Of course, that's only my opinion. So that could provide for mining operations a solid ground for expansion in the Canadian Arctic. Unless, of course, there is an accident, political accident, or it's sometimes very difficult to predict. But I think that there is the conditions are there for the continuation of expansion of commodities prices that could warrant profitability of mining operations in the Canadian Arctic.
One area I wanted to dig a little deeper in, just so I could understand it a little better, was the relevance of the shipping strategies of the major shippers in the region. Because you talked about the fact that when presented with the opportunity of additional time for travel opportunities because of the thinning ice, that instead of increasing the frequency of their shipping, they've moved to higher volume ships to take the same number of trips in order to capture economies of scale. So, like, what does that mean for transit in the area? What are the impacts on potential growth, and are there impacts of this kind of a strategy to put more pressure on for port development, right? Which we know is an essential service that we're lacking.
There are two things in what you said. The fact that precisely, at least in the short term, most shipping companies present in the Canadian Arctic to service mining sites or communities bet rather on the expansion of unit size, larger ships to reach economies of scale, rather than the increase in frequency, which was forecast by several observers but they were proven wrong. That this business model may have limitations, because when you have purchased several larger units, but the demand keeps expanding, which may be the case in the future with more mining operations going online, with increased demand from local communities, then there might be tensions on the demand side of the market. How are shipping companies going to answer this should that happen? Well, maybe they would have to buy more ships and then increase the frequency of voyages. I know that, for instance, the Gagné is considering this possibility, but of course that means that they're going to enter into significant investments. So to what extent are they going to go ahead with this possibility? Nobody knows. As far as port infrastructure is concerned, as I hinted, nobody confirmed it openly, but several shipping companies privately offline told me, well, we're used to operating with havens, not ports, and this is an advantage for us, despite the fact that it's more complicated, because it prevents other competitors from entering this market. Now they have a real expertise in dealing with the fact that they have to operate with havens and not real ports. I once observed how they were doing it in Calwood, and it's true. It's a kind of ballet between barges. The ship is moored offshore, and the cranes are performing very efficiently. After over several years, one can bet that indeed that they gathered the expertise to perform this way, but a newcomer would have to learn how to do that. And so it may be that it wouldn't be that effective, at least for a few years. So I think that the shipping companies are not pushing that much. Of course, they can't claim that for the construction of new ports, because for the present time, it provides them with a limited possibility of the competitors entering the market. In the longer term, they of course admit that it limits the possibility of market expansion. How are they going to balance between these two ways of seeing the equation? I don't know. But should demand expand quite significantly with coming online of new mining sites, the expansion of demand for communities, possibility of nascent industry in the north, then I think that they will realize that it's going to be much easier with the construction of improved port facilities.
So interesting, right? So what you think might be happening on the surface, you just have to dig a little deeper and dig into the interests of the players, and you can see quite a different picture. So that is very interesting. In your paper, you also underline how, obviously, critically, the economics are essential to the development of any land corridor. They're essential to the development of additional shipping opportunities. And of course, it's essential to community development. And we've seen this throughout the webinar series, how critical the economic business case is to the development of this kind of supporting infrastructure. And I guess, I'll ask you just to sort of speculate a little bit on whether these types of supporting infrastructure, is it really can they solely be built on the back of the business case? Or is it more the sum of interests, the sum of our interests in sovereignty, in economic growth, and community support, as well as, the economic development that these kinds of pieces of infrastructure can develop? So I guess my question is it the sum of interests that all need to come together in order to make these kinds of things viable? Or, is it really just the numbers?
There are ports that can be built and be profitable only for businesses. It proves that there are several private ports linked to mining operations in Mine Inlet, linked to Mary River, in Deception Bay, the two ports servicing Extrata and Raglan mines, nickel mines. So that proves that it's possible for a small but effective port to be built and be profitable. But the problem with these ports is that they service only the mines, not the communities, because they're too far from any community. The problem is it possible to build a port that could service both a mining operation and a community? And we have no example for the time being, for now, of such a possibility. But then, to what extent would it be possible to build a port that could act as a hub and then service both the mining operation and the community, like Iqaluit, for instance, that could expand in the future, servicing the municipality, servicing also possible mining operations in the vicinity with feeder services. Then it would, of course, increase the profitability of both projects if it could serve both the interests of communities and mining operations. The difficulty in the Arctic, because of the sheer distances that we have to cope with, is it's difficult to find such locations.
Yeah, for sure. So here's my last question to you, and I would invite you to just share as much as you can with us on this. I certainly found your paper, it was just rich, with information and data and analysis, and I was left with lots of questions, and I'm sure you still have lots of questions. So could you talk to us a little bit more about what you think the further research that's needed to assess these interconnections and the viability of shipping and land-based corridors together? What did you come out of this paper with that you thought would be critical next research questions to answer?
I was definitely felt that when talking with Canadian shipping companies that we've talked a lot about, like NIAS and MTS, Deganier, Woodward, that they were still trying to assess themselves what would the future look like. They have designed business models that are effective for now, adapting to the reality of climate change, but they are also wondering to what extent the pace of climate change is going to accelerate or not, to what extent is going to change significantly the conditions for them to operate. Not merely the ice, which I said could be counterintuitive. It might be that climate change is going to make the shipping more complicated in the short term than easier in the longer term. It could also be that climate change could make for much longer periods of time of navigability. Then it would, of course, completely change the equation of the market access. And to how would they answer to these new conditions? Would they, as we said, increase frequency, or would they cling with the fleet that they already have and merely increase by another ship or two, but not increasing the frequency of service? I don't know, and I think that they don't know themselves because they're still trying to assess to make the picture clearer for them and weighing the possibilities that are open for themselves. They also need to assess to what extent communities would like would insist on the development of port facilities. We mentioned Iqaluit that took 30 years to have only a wharf being built. I know that there are other communities in the Arctic that would like real wharves to be built to serve themselves. I know that, for instance, Kikik-Taujik, another community on Baffin Island, once considered attracting Chinese investors to build a port for themselves. Of course, it went nowhere because the federal government and the territorial government never would have agreed to this venture. But the very fact that they considered the possibility to ask for a Chinese company to help them develop a port underlines the fact that there is this possibility present for several communities, that they think it would definitely improve their daily lives and provide them with economic possibilities if they had improved marine services.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Frederick, for your presentation today and for your incredibly rich paper. I'd also like to thank the audience for taking the time to join us. Dr. Lasserre's paper is now available on policyschool.ca. And again, just a reminder to everyone that we have 2 more webinars in this series, one on February 24th on key constitutional issues relative to the Canadian Northern Quarter. So lots to talk about there. And in March, although we haven't got our date confirmed yet, we'll be hosting a discussion on reducing transaction costs on infrastructure quarter projects in Canada, which of course is critical to any consideration of a Canadian Northern Quarter. You can register for these webinars at policyschool.ca, and a recording of today's presentation will be available within the next 2 days, so you can watch it again or you can share it with your colleagues who might be interested. So everyone, thank you again for joining us today, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.